Thinking Native, 11 Insights for 2011, with your host Saul Kropman from The Digital Edge.
Hi Saul, I'm Jackie Maroon, and I'm an interaction designer, and I head up the team of interaction design at Native. And what that is exactly is it's managing the user experience and creating the user experience from a practical and user perspective or functional perspective in any campaign or system or application that we build. I like to break it down into, there are three aspects of user experience. The one is beauty, and one is that it appeals to real people as opposed to imaginary robots. And the third is that there's a level of ingenuity in the user experience that users find compelling or interesting. Interaction design doesn't deal so much with the beauty side of it, more with the real people and ingenuity side. So there are a lot more people in Native who are responsible for user experience than just us. But we focus very much on the practical, real people aspect, where a person engages and needs to immediately understand what we're trying to give them, what we're trying to lead them through, and what result we'd like them to have from a particular experience.
But why actually care about user experience? I mean, surely they're there already, you don't really have to worry.
The medium is changing a lot. I think that it started out, this industry started out with the broadcasting perspective of media, where you deliver a message out to the masses and they receive whatever it is that you feel they should be hearing. And there's a dictating of the experience in that model. It's moved much more to a facilitative model, where a brand has to facilitate an experience and the users drive that experience and change it and contribute to it. And so it's a lot more inclusive. So if you're not doing that with a user, you stand the risk of losing a competitive advantage that you may previously have had, because it's becoming the distinguishing feature between different brands in the digital space, is how interactive and engaging is it for users, and how seriously does it take users. Just to give you an example of something that I've discovered quite recently, which is an excellent illustration of how seriously users are taken. There's a site called EnglishTown.com, and they teach English online. They recruit teachers from all over the world to take up 1 hour slots and have conversations with other users who are wanting to learn English. And the users rate the class at the end of the class, and the teacher gets paid on the user's rating. Now, that's starting to illustrate how important a user's experience actually is. That may be a user's experience of the teacher themselves, but also the technology that they have around them in that space will influence that experience. So interaction design is actually becoming the core of what we want to offer our clients and our community.
The whole English Town example is a great example, because surely that's a very subjective thing. I mean, one person might like the teacher, one person might not like the teacher, and it's the same with all interaction design.
Totally. I think that what we found, just taking a step aside to usability testing, when we do usability testing, we started out many years ago doing large samples, and a large sample might be 20 users, but realized that the first 5 users uncover 90% of the usability flaws. And so there's always a general issue, and I don't think it's as individual as people might think it is. There's always a general way that users experience something, and general things that will make them lost, confused, and feel or rate the experience as low. So yes, it is subjective, but there are some general principles that most users find.
Can you guide us through some of those general principles?
Well, the danger of that is that anything I say now is going to be dated in 3 weeks because this medium is changing literally by week. And as new platforms come out, they're changing our models and our ways of thinking. If I were to be cornered on principles for interaction design, I would say that you have to ask users. You can't assume. And whether it's one user or 5 users, you have to check those assumptions in the context of what you're building. So if you're building an interactive adventure campaign experience versus a hospital billing and tracking system, you can't assume how the user may need to interact with that, because we're never working in our field of specialization. We're working in business domains that we don't naturally exist in. So that would be my golden principle, is always ask the user. And I think as part of Native, we're really wanting to encourage our clients to be bold enough to ask their users what they want. And that's very different to market research. It's not about segmentation and defining an LSM and psychographics and demographics and so on. It's about actually sitting with the user in front of their computer or their mobile phone or whatever application we're designing for, and saying, if we asked you to do this, how would you do it? What do you need to see? What questions do you have in your mind when you're looking at it?
So it's literally a case of standing over their shoulder.
Absolutely. And the insights that you get from that could be a small principle that could make or break a system. You could have a user revolt if that one principle is not in place.
Is it too late to make fundamental changes, though, when you get to the user testing point?
It depends what you mean by the user testing point. We try to introduce user testing at the paper stage, so paper prototyping, and that's why we often wireframe in quite a bit of detail. If we are going to put those wireframes in front of a user, or even designs in front of a user, and say, when you look at the screen, what do you think? What do you see as your main call to action? What is driving you? What is confusing you? Those answers will then help us ensure that when we get to development, and it will be costly to make changes, that we're only dealing with minor tweaks and not fundamental flaws with the system. Obviously, we try to find a real sample group that's available in the business or area or real segment that we're working in. And sometimes it's just not feasible, and we're having to work on best practice. You know, these are the basic principles in this context, and we're going to go with those and go live with a beta test, and then that's where analytics and tracking comes in. So importantly at that step is that gives us the next real life scenario of what is working in the live environment and what is not working, and that becomes our next iteration. Once we see the real system go live, real users are encountering it in their day-to-day lives, what do they use or not use, and where do they fall off? You know, when we've got a conversion path we're taking them down, where do we lose them? And to correct those mistakes. So that becomes vital information in the refinement and evolution of a system.
I get the impression interaction design is a very iterative process, and throughout the lifetime of the website or the campaign.
It definitely is. But having said that, we can definitely we can inject a lot of thinking early on in the process that at least gets it to a quality phase. But yes, then it must iterate, because also the environment changes and users change, and there's nothing static about this industry. We've got to keep refining what we do to meet ongoing needs or new requirements.
Going back a bit, you mentioned beauty and how that's important. Is there worry then a matter of style over substance?
There are always people who will value style higher than substance, and that's where they're coming from. That's their important or their valuable offering. But I think what an interaction designer does is it balances that with substance. So we never value substance over style, but we try to balance the two. And the analogy is Captain Kirk and Spock in Star Trek, is that you've got to have the logic and the emotion in the same experience, because users approach anything with both their left and their right brain, and we have to address the needs of both. In many respects, the interaction designer is probably coming from a left brain perspective if they're working with a graphic designer. But having said that, there are other intuitions that come into play where we're also looking for an emotional level of comfort in a user. where they're not feeling frustrated, and that, I suppose, is also drawing in a right brain. So there are many mixes, but we would never make something ugly or insist that it be ugly, because I think harmony and beauty is very important to any user, but we're trying to introduce a balance.
With an industry and with a subsection of the industry such as interaction design that's moving so quickly, how do you actually find clients are finding this, and what's the approach to almost selling this to clients?
I think that it is a new component that clients are being introduced to, and they're not necessarily used to it or not necessarily seeing the value of it. But because this industry and Native specifically has this value of convergence, where we're converging all types of media into one experience for the user, they are starting to see that if that's not a coordinated and seamless experience across the visual experience, across the functional experience, the textual and conceptual experience, that things can fall apart very quickly. And what could be an incredible and innovative visionary campaign could turn and be a disaster in the same stroke if there isn't that thread that's pulling everything together. So I think that it's something that is being driven. The need for interaction design is being driven by the convergence of media and the involvement of users in defining what it is that they want on the web, on any kind of digital experience. You know, they're driving it now. We're seeing consumers drive their experience more and more in every area of marketing.
So, Jackie, can you give us some examples of either good or bad interaction design without actually offending anyone else?
Saul, that's a very difficult question, because good interaction design should be invisible to the average person. Bad interaction design is quite clear, and I don't want to go on record criticizing anyone, because it does tend to be quite a negative and critical exercise looking at interaction design on sites. The difficulty with naming someone who has a good interactive experience on the site is that a lot of sites get it right in some parts, but not totally. So take just an opinion of mine, taking Google as an example. Google has an excellent experience of search. My opinion is that their experience and interaction design of email is shocking. When we do interaction design, as an example, I'm working on a mega drop-down at the moment, one of these new big drop-downs. I'll look for examples of sites that do that particular feature well, and that's not to say that the rest of the site has good interaction design. So it really is picking parts of sites at the most detailed level, and that's why it's an almost impossible question to answer.
Are there any sort of generic, almost negative best practices that you could recommend not to do?
Or avoid? Yeah. In the realm of corporate websites, a constant and chronic mistake in local websites is designing website according to the company structure and not from the point of view or perspective of a user's questions and needs. Other than that, it really is not taking into account what a user might be asking when they arrive at a site. So assuming too much and giving them too much. Users don't like to choose, they just want what they want. That's an old cliche in interaction design, and it's quite a hard thing to deliver on, but you have to be more precise than just trying to give them everything, which is a failing of many local sites.
But I'm kind of getting the impression from you, what you're saying is that it would almost be better if there was a generic template of interactions for websites.
You get something called interaction patterns. And these are, in the same way that you get design patterns in a programming context, these are best practice ways of doing a drop-down field or a menu of certain sorts. And there's a lot of discussion on the web between interaction designers of best practice in those things and an unbelievable amount of opinions. So there are best practices. We always research those. They change daily. And we're constantly grappling with new problems as the medium evolves.
And I suppose the biggest problem is that those best practices, as you call them, change per device and per experience that you want to promote.
Absolutely, absolutely. If you're using a mouse as opposed to finger tapping on an iPad or phone, you've got a very different mindset. It's a very different behavior.
Obviously with interaction design, you mentioned that there's so many different threads keeping the campaign together and that sort of concept. There's so many different devices these days. You've got touch, you've got non-touch devices, you've got the iPad, you've got tablets. How do you keep it all together? And how do you keep it that common thread amongst all those devices?
Well, it always comes back to the user in context. So different devices are used in different contexts, and that's why it's important to actually sit with the user and see what it is that they need in each environment that they're in. So if they're in their car, what are they needing versus if they're at home versus if they're at work or at the gym or wherever they may be intersecting with the campaign you're delivering to them. They all have their role to play, and it's always just a question of understanding where they're at and what they need. The touch devices obviously bring a new tactile component into what was primarily a very visual experience, and it becomes so much more intuitive and immersive for the user to engage. So as it's very exciting for us, as devices like this become available, we can almost get closer to the user in that kind of environment, and it's an extension of their physical being, which is very exciting. And it's the whole Minority Report's vision coming to life, where you can actually interact with content at a physical level rather than at a visual level. So interaction design is always about going back to the user. Whatever platform or device comes out, it doesn't change the principles that we work with. It makes our world more interesting. And I think another point is that interaction designers need to be using those devices and very familiar with them at a personal level. You can't be designing at a distance, imagining what it might be like to use an iPad. You've got to have that experience at hand and understand if it, that's always your first port of call is, could I use this? And then if I could use it, let me ask the user if they could use it, and working through it like that.
So does that mean the Native will be kind of device agnostic, or will they have specific platforms that they specialize in?
We're wanting to be conceptually driven and really innovate in this space. So not restricted by devices, but coming up with concepts and strategies for clients that deliver the requirement to the user or the experience to the user, and whatever device is required to do that, we are going to be challenging the boundaries of what has been seen on those devices and how they can work together. We don't want to be restricted by technology. Technology is a facilitator to drive, and we will choose the appropriate ones for what a client is wanting to give to their users.
Jackie, any closing thoughts or something that you'd like to tell the clients or potential clients of Native?
I would say that this is the year of interaction design. It's a discipline that's coming into its own in South Africa, and Native is very passionate about it because it's the thing that creates a competitive advantage and can make or break a site or campaign. We're very excited about being able to offer it at a much more detailed and sophisticated level than it's been offered in this country before.
Sign up.
Yes, indeed.
Thinking Native is a part of the making of Native, a 4-month journey into the making of South Africa's newest full-service agency. For more insights with Native's leading thinkers, visit us on www.native.co today or follow us on @NativeSpeak.